Welcome to our virtual Justice on the Block information clinic. This clinic is part of the virtual series Know Your Child's Education Rights. To help us learn more about whether your child is receiving an adequate education, we have Stephanie Johnson, Senior Attorney in the Tallahassee Office of Legal Services of North Florida, and Cheryl Sadler, Education Advocate with Legal Services of North Florida.
All right. So, Cheryl, tell me, what is special education?
Steph, this is an issue with so many of our clients. So special education means, well, it means that things are special, right? They are designed for a specific child. It means using teaching methods and curriculum that are specifically designed to help a child to achieve the same content and skills that every other kid in that class is supposed to achieve. It's supposed to help make up for, compensate for a disability. So, for example, if your child were deaf, you would want to make sure that there were a sign language interpreter or another kind of interpreter. If you had a child who couldn't hear, you would want to make sure, sorry, I just said that. If you had a child who couldn't see, you'd want to make sure that there was Braille. So, and it's free for parents. It's really important.
Okay. And how would I know if my child needs special education? Is it any disabled child?
Well, the first thing that you want to ask is, if your child is struggling in school, what specifically is your child having difficulty with? And then why? I mean, what is at the heart of that problem? Is it because of a disability? If it is, then you might be eligible for special education. But there's lots of reasons that kids struggle. Perhaps the child speaks another language, doesn't do their homework, it just drifts off in class. Then you're going to look for a different solution. And one thing that you can do as a parent that can help when you start to have these conversations with schools is to write things down. Just find the back of an envelope or a scrap of paper. Now, look at your child's tests, compare how they're doing with how they're expected to be doing at their grade level. Start talking to the teacher, talk to the principal, ask what they're trying to help your child learn. Ask yourself if your child has the same issues outside of school. And you should also talk to your child's doctor because they have all kinds of information on the kind of milestones and whether your child is developing typically or not. And that's important to know.
Okay. So how do I approach the school and how do I ask for special education services?
That is a hard thing to do. Mm-hmm. So, of course, because it's a bureaucracy, right? It's an organization, there are steps. So the first step that you take is that you have to write things down. This is really important. So, and you don't have to ask anything fancy. You have to say, I want my child to be evaluated for special education. And you put a date on the letter, but don't just ask the principal in the hallway or ask the teacher in the hallway because there's a timeline, right? A school has 30 days to agree or disagree. And if you don't have a date on that letter, that 30 days doesn't start really. And so it can go on it already feels like a long time. This takes a long time and you don't want it to take any longer. And then if they say yes or no, they have to tell you why in writing. Now, if they say yes, we're going to assume that they say yes, we're going to test your child, then they're going to basically tell you what tests they want to use and ask you if that's okay. You have to say yes. And then after that, they have 60 days, and you'd think that's 2 months to complete the testing. And of course, the goal of the testing is to see if your child is eligible, and testing is free. But just so you know, 60 days is not 60 days. Like you don't just get a calendar and say, okay, October 1 is day 1. And so the end must be November 30th because it doesn't really count weekends and it doesn't count holidays. And so, there's a little bit of kind of wiggle room in there that can be really frustrating because you think, well, it should be done and it's not done. Now, if the school does say no, you can ask them, 2 things. You can ask them how you exercise your right to disagree. because they have to have a process for that too. And there's also some federally funded centers. They're called Parent Training and Information Centers. And those folks are really literally paid to help parents figure this stuff out. And so hopefully that information is going to show up in the chat box, because there are groups in every single state, and they're great because they're used to talking to parents. They use friendly language. They don't use all of the crazy words and jargon that, confuses everybody. So they're definitely a good resource.
Okay. And so if the school says that my child is eligible, what does that mean?
Well, eligibility is really kind of a two-pronged thing. So first of all, it means your child has a disability. And disabilities, fall into maybe 3 buckets. There could be physical disabilities, like we talked about, being deaf or blind. You can have cognitive disabilities, which are brain-based. Everything's really brain-based, but that means difficulties in how you think or process information or learn. Mm-hmm. And then you can have emotional or mental health disabilities. Sometimes you can't control your emotions, or your brain races way fast. So you have to both have the disability, and by the way, emotional mental health could be like stress or depression or anxiety. And then that disability has to impact your child's learning. So, if you have a disability, for example, let me give you an example. If your child was deaf or hard of hearing, but they read lips, and they were really good at it, then it probably doesn't impact their learning. You might have to remind the teacher not to talk with their head turned, whatever, but that's a child who's going to learn, just fine. Mm-hmm. And so you wouldn't ask for special education because they're not going to get any benefit out of it. Mm-hmm. Now, so that's really the question is this something that we can do something to address to help your child learn?
Okay. And so if the school has determined that my child is eligible and I've agreed to the testing and they've done the testing, then what happens?
Oh, then you get to have a meeting. Oh. And, who doesn't love meetings? I mean, that is just big fun. So what happens then is they get a whole team of people together, and that has to include the parents. So they can't just meet without you. And you talk about what the test showed. And you might talk about things like, your child's vision. Did they have a vision test? Do they need eyeglasses, so they can see what's on the board? Do they need a hearing test? How are they doing in school? Maybe they're doing great in math and horrible in reading. And they may talk to you about things that you've seen about your child. And then you basically say, all right, not you, but the group of you, based on all of that, are we going to move forward and provide services? And, and that's a huge thing. So it's like you've opened the gate, right? Mm-hmm. And so now we're inside the realm of possibility. How do we then create something that will help your child?
Okay. And then what would be the next step after the meeting?
Okay, so the next step is huge, and it's so huge that we are just going to talk about it this much today, and then we're going to talk about it in the next session. And that's called an individual education plan. Call it an IEP. And that is basically the set of services that you as a team agree that a child should get in order to, get the support they need to learn. So it's a really big deal, and it gets complicated.
Right. Okay. And what if you have a child that's pre-kindergarten? They're not yet in regular school yet.
Great question. Yeah. So even babies, even infants can qualify for special education services, but it doesn't go through the school because they're not going to school, and so it wouldn't make any sense. So the key is, how is your child doing on what the doctors would call developmental milestones? And milestones are things like physical. When are they supposed to reach for things? When did they roll? When did they crawl? When did they start to walk? And then there are cognitive or brain-based things. So when do they start solving problems? how are they thinking and expressing themselves and learning. And communication actually sort of got into that. Talking and listening and understanding, recognizing faces, all of that. And they also, just like our other kids, have social and emotional issues. So when are they comfortable playing by themselves? Are they secure? Are they happy? And then, practical things like, are they learning to eat? Are they eating solid food? Are they learning to dress themselves? So when a child is delayed on any of these milestones, that can be an indicator that you might want to take that next step and say, do I need to get my child some help so that they get back on track?
And I would imagine you'd want to get that help as early as possible.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because the group that does that in Florida is called Early Steps. So it's literally very early. And that contact information is in the chat too. And Early Steps works with families. So again, and it's sort of less of a process because they're really working with an individual family, not inside a big system like a school or a district.
All right.
And they're used to working with really little wiggly ones.
So this is great information, Cheryl. And let me just reiterate, our next education session is going to be focused totally on the IEP and the process of getting there and what it looks like and what the team looks like and all of that. And just a little housekeeping note, this video provides legal information, should not be considered legal advice. This video does not create an attorney-client relationship or substitute for legal advice that you've been given. You may have defenses that we haven't addressed here, so you need to talk to a lawyer. And then for more information about LSNF, you can go to www.lsnf.org or call 850-385-9007. And we are going to have links on the chat that talk about the resources that Cheryl talked about and some additional information. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Steph.
All right. Thanks, Cheryl.